Today, I'm reading a section from a book called The Power of Knitting, called Knitting for the Revolution, against the backdrop of the CIA firing their diverse spies. Courage. I need it so desperately. The same courage of the knitting spies, the men and women who during World War II spied for the Allies using knitting as their covert messaging system. Knitting is a weapon. Knitting is ideal for hiding messages, like Morse code, because it is binary. There are only two stitches, knit and purl. Positions of troops, numbers of weapons, movements of trains, everything can be hidden in a simple hat, in a pair of mittens, in a scarf. For the non-knitter, it is impossible to read the codes. Even knitting patterns themselves appear to be written in secret code. This explains why during World War II, the British government banned all printed knitting patterns out of fear that they could be used to communicate information to the Germans. British intelligence made great use of their knitting spies, but so did the Germans. Both sides were using knitting spies, and the men of both sides' armies were so into underestimating women that they were not regularly catching them. Unverified reports published in the 1940s in the British periodical Pearson's magazine claimed that the German spies knit entire sweaters with yarn full of knots, which once unraveled and placed in a frame containing the letters of the alphabet revealed secret messages. But the most exciting true stories of knitting spies come from occupied Europe during two world wars. During World War I in Roubaix, near Lille, a region of France under German occupation, Madame Levingly, a woman who lived in a house overlooking the loading yard of the Roubaix railway station, was a knitting spy. Louise de Batangs, a truly remarkable woman, had recruited Levingly into the Alice Network, a group of spies and allies who operated in northern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, gathering and passing on intelligence about the Germans to the British. Madame Levingly sat knitting in front of a window on the first floor of her house overlooking the loading yard. Each time she saw something to report, she tapped out the information on the floor in code. Her children, pretending to do their homework on the floor below, wrote down the codes. To understand the courage of this woman and her children, one has to know that they did this dangerous work even as a German field marshal lived in their house. During World War II, the Belgian resistance enrolled older women who, like Madame Levingly, lived near train lines and loading yards and could watch the German movements as they knit. These women reported messages in their knitting using codes that were rather simple but very effective. A dropped stitch, which produced a hole, for example, signified the passing of one type of train. Purling on a field of knit stitches, which forms a bump in the fabric, referred to another type of train. The finished knitted fabrics were then handed over to fellow spies in the Belgian resistance. Although both sides used knitting spies, knitting proved to be an excellent cover for those spying for the Allies. Elizabeth Bentley, an American, carried clandestine material from the US government to Soviet agents inside her knitting bag. She hid microfilms, memos, and coded documents in a basket full of balls of wool, needles, patterns, and fabric. After the war, when people referred to her as Red Spy Queen, she claimed that a better name would have been the Communist June Cleaver, the ultimate dutiful housewife character of the popular 1950s show. The absurdity of this image illustrates why knitting was such a successful cover. In the collective imagination of the first half of the 20th century, a woman knitting was the antithesis of a spy. Phyllis Pippa Latour Doyle was one of the knitting spies who proved this stereotype wrong. Her amazing life story could have easily come from my grandmother's lips. It is a hidden gem from a time of heroism, self sacrifice, and courage. But it is also a testimony to the modesty of those who were motivated by a strong sense of duty and honor to fight Nazism. Pippa did not reveal her spying activity to anyone, keeping it secret even from her own children, until several decades after the war ended. Only then was her heroism praised and her story published in the New Zealand Herald. One of the 40 women members of the Special Operations Executive, the secret force that Winston Churchill wanted to use to set Europe ablaze. Her code name was Genevieve. At the age of 23, Latour, perfectly fluent in French, was trained to become a British spy inside occupied France. On a cold winter night, she was parachuted into the darkness of war behind enemy lines, with her precious communication code encrypted in a length of silk yarn that she wore as a ribbon in her hair. Genevieve cycled across occupied France, reporting on the position and movements of the Germans, carrying her knitting in her basket. She recorded her discoveries, purling and stitching in the coded messages, and then transmitting the information via radio from different locations. A few times she was stopped and searched by the Germans and narrowly escaped being discovered. Once, a female police officer asked her to strip on the suspicion that she was hiding something underneath her clothes. The officer even untied the silk yarn that held her hair back, and Pippa shook her head to prove that there was nothing hidden in her hair. Knitting for the revolution, knitting for the resistance, knitting for spying. The stories I learned through my childhood, adolescence, and youth have all enriched my life, and I like to think that they helped me become a better adult and have guided me through my present ordeal. My grandmother was my first guru, but she was not the only one.